welcome to the fireside chat on demystifying zero trust and SASE. As organizations adopting cloud, the way they apply security is changing dramatically. Zero trust, network access, also known as ZTNA, and secure access, service edge, also known as SASE, are the two buzzwords that are gaining steam as organizations seek to better secure their increasingly dispersed remote workforces against attack. We today have a highly reputed and eminent guest in our fireside chat in order to take a look at each of these architectural approaches and how they might work together to enhance organizations' cybersecurity posture. Please welcome Sachin Jain, Global CIO and CISO Evalueserve, in this fireside chat. Hello and a warm welcome to you, Sachin.
Thanks, Kalpana. Thanks for having me at this chat.
It's a pleasure talking to you today for me as well. And we appreciate you for taking out time and joining us today. So, Sachin, my first question is, as you know, the core operating principle of Zero Trust is that no user or device should ever be granted access to resources based solely upon location on the network. How do you think Zero Trust framework is helping build cyber resilience across the ecosystem?
If I go back a few years back when we did not have a very standard and defined way of putting this architecture in place, people were struggling because this work from anywhere, any device. I think this thought started way back and much before this whole zero trust came into picture. And if we look at how people were accessing applications, data, and consuming various services from the organization network, and if we largely see the whole focus to enhance the security posture was mostly driven around enterprise network, where all the controls, appliances, policies were tightening the security controls within the enterprise. And while there was a need which was growing to access information and data from anywhere in any device, and this whole mobility thing also evolved around that principle, where organizations wanted to give more flexibility for their employees to increase the efficiency and productivity, but at the same time, they were also struggling with the kind of security controls they had to build. And in fact, if we talk about how some of the CXOs were looking at the security in the last few years, and I personally went and talked about a borderless network where there is no perimeter. And when there is no perimeter, then how do you trust the devices? And largely it was seen earlier where if you are part of the organization network, then you are in a trusted zone, and then you can probably just roam around freely within the network, and there are no restrictions, and probably there are no policies. And even some of the global companies like us, where you have trusted locations across the world, and when you move from one location to another location, or maybe sitting at one location, you try to access resources of another location, then it becomes a trusted territory. But having said that, when people also started looking at some of the large-scale breaches, which actually happened by some users who did not have privileges to carry out such an attack, but the way those privileges were exploited and to gain access within the organization, and then the hackers, they tried to elevate their privileges and they were successful. That's where I think a lot of these things started developing, and when we started talking about this whole remote working and the kind of attacks which happen, maybe it's related to ransomware or phishing attacks, then it becomes almost difficult task to ensure that how do you have a foolproof security within the organization. You know what users are doing, what kind of data they are accessing, whether they need that kind of privileges or access or not. These kind of things, I think, drive the need for having a zero trust architecture where you do not trust blindly any sort of access or users, but you give that access based on the need. And this, I think we'll probably talk maybe more as we move along. But this whole principle around managing identities is something which is very, very relevant in this zero trust architecture.
So the shift of enterprises to modern architecture centered around cloud and mobile requires a modern security architecture to enable the businesses to securely leverage their new investments. Security vendors are coining newer terms, and SASE is the new buzzword in the market. From a security leader's perspective, how do you see the buzz around secure access service edge, that is SASE?
Yeah, see, what I always see, whether it's a security or maybe any part of the IT, you have every new term. It's just like a maybe launch of a new iPhone every year, and every year you have maybe one of the other buzzwords, but some of them are very relevant. And I think SASE, as we call it, is again nothing very fancy around it, but it's just the cover what you need to give to the growing need of organizations to go for digital. Because as you move more towards it, as you adopt, let's say, cloud in a big way, then this whole concept I was sharing earlier around uh, the perimeterless network, where people are accessing network from anywhere, any device, and then the shift to the cloud, where your data is not residing within your own enterprise, and then all those enterprise level controls will not alone be sufficient. Then this shift in this whole mindset and the architecture, which is one is the zero trust, which is more around how do you explore some of the existing controls, how do you monitor and maintain the movement of data. But when you talk about the overall coverage, where you talk about everything like from network to your applications, your users, identities, and even things like zero trust, which is around more policies, then to combine everything, you need to give an architecture which is nothing but the SASE, which is taking its shape with the growing adoption of digital. Because SASE is more oriented towards cloud delivered services, and organizations who are moving their workloads in a big way to the cloud, and they have, whether it's a pure public, hybrid, or maybe a private cloud, then they are actually leveraging this cloud delivered service in a way where it fits very well in the current scheme of things.
So what are the things CISOs must consider when evaluating SASE architecture for their businesses?
Yeah, that's a very good question. See, though there are multiple guides and probably maybe documents available which can talk about what are the maybe the best way to deploy some of these architectures. How do you test your current environment, and then figure out what are the things you need to follow. But what I personally feel, I think it's a sort of step-by-step approach, because some of these these fields, whether it's around SASE, zero trust, and I always feel security is a dynamically changing field, and it's like the nature of threats, which is very, very dynamic. Even the development also is very, very dynamic around some of the security terminology or the solutions. I think this will also evolve very quickly, and you need to take that step-by-step approach to figure out what you need to do and how much you need to do, and then figure out a plan that by when you want to achieve some of these security principles within your own framework.
Right. So last but not the least, please talk about common SASE and ZTNA use cases and tactical and strategic approach to implementing the frameworks.
One of the very relevant use case we all are witnessing these days is the remote work environment. And if we look at how people are working today, where they are not going to offices, then when we talk about this whole enterprise network in terms of capacity, accessibility, security, I think everything was taken aback for many organizations who did not have enough capability to allow people to work from home. And in fact, there are many companies and industry who actually never had any type of work from home. Their systems were not designed. I think the very common use case is this work from home scenario where you have large number of remote workers for almost all industries. And we had one point in time where and especially this was right after the pandemic, or I can try to define maybe first 6 months of pandemic where people were mostly in reactive mode. And there have been many cases I personally know where even the security policies were compromised because they did not have any means to enforce security policies for people working from home. And in some cases, I've seen people just shifted the office infrastructure like PCs, desktops to people's home. And those are the, I think, cases where you can define the complete architecture if your applications are on the cloud and if you have enabled some of the application even within your own network to be accessible on the internet in a secure way. Then how do you basically leverage some of the security principles to allow a secure access to your assets within your own enterprise as well as on the cloud? I think this one is a very popular and common use case across all organizations.
Right. So, what could be tactical and a strategic approach to implementing the frameworks?
Largely depends on where the organization's maturity related to cloud and digital stand. And if they already are high on cloud adoption, they're big on digital, then I think their path is already set. They just need to go ahead, assess, and deploy. And as I already said, this is not something about a product which you can buy and deploy. This is all around building an approach and probably maybe a change in a mindset also. How do you look at the security? Whether you look at security more from an enterprise network perspective, or whether you look at the security holistically, where you look at everything from not just enterprise, but look at overall where your data is moving. And I think more importantly, the change in approach is more around users and identities, where you do not focus on location, as you rightly mentioned in your very first question. It is not dependent on location. It is not dependent on device. You need to figure out the identities, who needs access, how much access they need, and at what time they need this access. And I think there is a principle what we also follow, and I've seen a lot of organizations also doing that, where you need to give access on a need to know basis. You need to figure out who's accessing, what they're accessing, where they're accessing, and how they're accessing that information. And you need to know all these things before you're providing that access. And there are, in fact, newer terms also in parlance to the cloud, where you talk about just-in-time access, and which is not but a time-bound access. For example, if I need access to an application for half an hour, I'll get access just for half an hour. I'll not get that access permanently or for a longer period of time, so that if, let's say, my machine gets compromised or my account gets compromised, then I avoid exploitation of my identity.
Right.
And that's where I think this whole approach is taking a shift, where you're not just focusing on managing things legacy way, but you are trying to modernize the whole thing with the shift in the security posture and controls based on the data and applications and information assets, how they are traveling within the system.
Right. Thank you, Sachin. It was a complete pleasure interacting with you and appreciate your time for sharing the valuable insights. And I'm sure these are really informative and useful to other organizations as well.
For more updates from CXO TV, please like and subscribe to our channel.